What if I told you that emotional pain is not what's breaking you? That the real damage is coming from how easily the world gets access to your inner state. A comment, a delay, a rejection, a memory, and suddenly your peace is gone. Most people today are not weak because they lack intelligence or opportunity. They're weak because their emotions are exposed, untended, untrained. We live in a world designed to provoke you, to pull reactions out of you, to keep you scrolling, comparing, reacting, consuming, and then we wonder why we feel drained, unstable, emotionally exhausted. The Stoics saw this coming long before algorithms, notifications, or social pressure. They understood a simple but brutal truth. If your emotions are easy to touch, your life will always be easy to disturb. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, surrounded by war, betrayal, sickness, and death, wrote words that still cut through noise today. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That is not comfort, that is command. Stoicism does not promise happiness, it promises control, control over your reactions, control over your focus, control over the inner world no one else can touch unless you allow it. In this series, we're breaking down 12 Stoic principles that, when practiced honestly, will make you emotionally untouchable. Not numb, not cold, but grounded, calm, and dangerously steady. This is not motivational entertainment. This is mental training. Before we begin, understand this. Do not listen passively. Do not multitask. Do not treat this like background noise. Each principle builds discipline. Each one removes weakness. Each one strengthens your internal authority. Like the video now, stay present and don't skip ahead because the principle you avoid is often the one you need most. Let's begin. Principle number 1, master the boundary between what is yours and what is not. Each morning before the world reaches for us, there is a silent decision waiting to be made, not about productivity, ambition, or success, but about sovereignty. Will we hand our inner world to chance, to other people's moods, to events we cannot command? Or will we draw a line, quiet, firm, immovable, between what belongs to us and what never will? This boundary is the foundation of emotional untouchability. Without it, we are exposed. With it, we are armored. We wake into a world already in motion. Messages arrive. Expectations press in. Memories from yesterday whisper unfinished business. The untrained mind rushes outward, attempting to manage outcomes, opinions, and futures that are not within reach. But we have learned, through pain, repetition, and reflection, that this outward grasping is the root of our disturbance. As Epictetus warned, if you think that what belongs to others is your own, you will be hindered, you will lament, you will be disturbed. Emotional resilience begins not with control, but with clarity. What is truly ours is deceptively small, yet infinitely powerful. Our judgments, our intentions, our actions, and the meaning we assign to events. Everything else, reputation, outcomes, other people's behavior, the unfolding of fate, moves according to forces far beyond us. The morning practice is not to deny this reality, but to face it without illusion. We do not shrink from responsibility, we refine it. We stop carrying what was never meant for our hands. When we confuse this boundary, we suffer twice. First, from the event itself. Second, from our insistence that it should have been different. Anger flares when others do not behave as we expect. Anxiety grows when the future refuses to obey our plans. Resentment takes root when the past cannot be rewritten. Yet none of these reactions are forced upon us. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That realization is not comforting, it is liberating. To become emotionally untouchable is not to become indifferent or cold. It is to become precise. We still care, but we no longer cling. We still act, but we release the demand for guaranteed results. Each morning we rehearse this distinction deliberately. We say to ourselves, "Today I will govern my thoughts. I will choose my responses. I will act with integrity." And when the world resists, as it always will, we will not take it personally. Resistance is not an insult. It is a condition of existence. This discipline reshapes how we experience provocation. Insults lose their poison when we see that another person's words belong to them, not us. Delays lose their power when we recognize that time unfolds on its own terms. Even loss, when met with this clarity, no longer shatters us completely. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." By refusing to imagine ownership over what we cannot command, we dramatically reduce unnecessary suffering. The untrained person asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The trained mind asks, "What part of this is mine to handle well?" That shift changes everything. We stop arguing with reality. We stop rehearsing grievances. We stop demanding that life conform to our preferences. Instead, we focus on excellence of character, because character is always within reach, even in chaos, even in loss, especially in discomfort. Morning after morning, we reinforce this boundary not as a theory, but as a lived posture. When emotion rises, we pause before obeying it. When fear appears, we examine it before amplifying it. When anger knocks, we ask whether it is responding to a real threat or merely to wounded pride. This pause is the space where freedom lives. It is small, but it is enough. In that space, we choose who we are. To live this way requires humility. We must accept that the universe owes us nothing, not fairness, not ease, not recognition, but in return it offers something far greater, the opportunity to practice virtue under real conditions. Strength that has never been tested is fragile. Calm that has never faced pressure is theoretical. We become emotionally untouchable not by avoiding hardship, but by meeting it without surrendering our inner command. So we begin here, with the boundary, with the daily decision to guard what is ours and release what is not. This is not a single insight, but a lifelong discipline, quiet, demanding, and transformative. As modern scholars of this tradition remind us, emotional freedom is not achieved by changing the world, but by mastering our relationship to it. When we hold this line each morning, we do not harden, we deepen. And in that depth, nothing external can truly reach us. Principle number 2, withdraw your emotional permission from the external world. After we draw the boundary between what is ours and what is not, a second, more demanding discipline confronts us each morning, the withdrawal of emotional permission. Many of us live as though the world has been granted authority over our inner state, as though people, events, and circumstances have the right to decide how we feel. This surrender often happens quietly, without resistance, until we realize how exposed it leaves us. Emotional untouchability begins the moment we reclaim that authority. We are not disturbed because something happens. We are disturbed because we allow it to pass judgment inside us. This is not denial, it is recognition. Epictetus expressed this truth with precision when he taught that it is not events themselves that trouble us, but the judgments we form about them. Every emotional reaction is preceded by consent. Somewhere between stimulus and response, we agree. This principle trains us to pause long enough to choose differently. The untrained mind reacts instantly. A word is spoken and anger ignites. A delay occurs and anxiety tightens. A comparison appears and envy quietly takes hold. These emotions feel automatic, but they are not commands. They are impressions. When we treat them as orders, we surrender control. When we treat them as passing suggestions, we regain it. Marcus Aurelius prepared himself daily by reminding his mind that interference and disrespect would come, but that none of them carried the power to harm his inner state. To withdraw emotional permission is not to suppress feeling. Suppression only drives emotion underground, where it grows distorted. Instead, we observe emotion as information, not identity. Anger reveals expectation. Fear reveals attachment. Sadness reveals loss. But information does not require obedience. We listen, we examine, and then we decide. This is the difference between reaction and mastery. Each morning we rehearse this stance before the day tests us. We remind ourselves that nothing external has authority over our peace. Praise will not inflate us. Criticism will not collapse us. Success will not intoxicate us. Failure will not define us. Seneca warned that those who depend on external conditions for happiness place themselves at the mercy of chance. We choose not to live at the mercy of chance. This principle reshapes our relationships. When we give others emotional permission, we become fragile. A single mood, word, or gesture can destabilize us. When we withdraw that permission, we remain present without being penetrated. We stay engaged without being consumed. Compassion remains, but dependence dissolves. We stop asking the world to handle us gently and begin handling ourselves with discipline. The true test of this practice appears under provocation. Someone disrespects us. Circumstances undermine our plans. In that moment, the urge to react feels urgent and justified. This is where emotional untouchability is either strengthened or lost. We ask one question: must I grant this event power over me? And in asking it, we often discover that we are free not to. Modern thinkers who study this tradition remind us that emotional mastery does not mean emotional absence. It means emotional ownership. We allow grief without surrendering to despair. We feel anger without becoming cruel. We notice fear without becoming paralyzed. Emotion becomes a signal, not a ruler. What once controlled us now informs us. With time, withdrawing emotional permission creates a deep inner quiet, not emptiness but clarity. The constant noise of reaction fades. We stop bracing ourselves against every inconvenience. We stop replaying imagined slights. We become difficult to provoke, not because we care less, but because we see more clearly. This is the second pillar of becoming emotionally untouchable. We do not harden ourselves. We refine our judgment. We do not retreat from life. We meet it with authority. Each morning we reclaim power we once surrendered unconsciously. And as that power returns, peace no longer feels fragile. It becomes stable, earned, and self-sustaining. Principle number 3, train the mind to respond, not react. Once we reclaim authority over what belongs to us and withdraw emotional permission from the external world, a deeper discipline emerges, the deliberate training of response. Reaction is instinctive. Response is cultivated. Reaction is immediate, loud, and often regrettable. Response is quiet, measured, and intentional. Each morning before the world places its demands upon us, we recommit to this training. We remind ourselves that speed is not strength and that mastery often lives in delay. The space between an event and our answer to it is where freedom resides. When that space is narrow, life controls us. When it is widened through practice, we control ourselves. Epictetus spoke of this space when he warned against being carried away by first impressions. He urged us to say to every troubling thought, "You are an appearance, and not at all the thing you appear to be." In doing so, we interrupt the reflex that turns momentary emotion into lasting damage. Reaction feels powerful because it is fast. Anger surges, words spill out, decisions are made in heat, but speed offers only the illusion of control. In reality, it is surrender, handing our agency to impulse. Response, on the other hand, requires restraint. It demands that we slow the mind, observe the emotion, and ask whether acting on it would serve our character or merely satisfy our ego. This pause is uncomfortable, but it is where self-mastery is forged. Each morning we practice this pause in advance. We imagine insults that may come. We anticipate frustration, delay, and resistance, not to dwell on them, but to prepare for them. Marcus Aurelius began his days by reminding himself that he would encounter difficult people, not to harden his heart, but to strengthen his judgment. Preparation transforms surprise into recognition. What is expected loses its power to shock us. Training response reshapes how we experience anger. Anger is not eliminated, it is examined. We ask whether it arises from a real injustice or a wounded sense of importance. Seneca described anger as a temporary madness, one that feels righteous while it lasts and shameful once it fades. By delaying our response, we allow clarity to return before action is taken. Most anger dissolves when denied immediate expression. Fear, too, changes under this discipline. When fear arises, reaction urges avoidance or paralysis. Response asks for assessment. Is the danger present or imagined? Is action required or patience? By refusing to react, we regain the ability to choose courage deliberately. Courage, after all, is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act according to reason despite it. This principle also governs speech. Words spoken in reaction often outlive the moment that produced them. A single sentence released without restraint can undo years of trust. Response teaches us silence when silence is stronger, and speech when speech is necessary. Modern scholars of this philosophy often note that restraint in speech is not weakness, but precision. The disciplined mind does not rush to be heard. Over time, the habit of response changes our reputation, not because we seek approval, but because steadiness becomes visible. Others notice that we are difficult to provoke. That chaos does not infect us easily. That pressure does not force us into rash decisions. This is not emotional distance. It is emotional command. We are fully present, yet no longer reactive. To respond rather than react is to live in alignment with reason rather than impulse. It is to let the mind lead the emotions instead of being dragged by them. Each day we may fail at this discipline. That is expected, but each morning we return to it without self-condemnation. Progress in mastery is measured not by perfection, but by shorter recoveries and fewer regrets. This is the third step toward becoming emotionally untouchable. We slow the moment just enough to reclaim ourselves. We refuse to let fleeting emotion dictate lasting consequence. In this widening space between impulse and action, we build a life governed not by chaos, but by choice. And with every deliberate response, our inner world grows quieter, steadier, and more difficult for the external world to disturb. Principle number 4, make peace with discomfort and use it as training. After learning to separate what is within our control, withdrawing emotional permission, and training the mind to respond rather than react, we arrive at a principle many resist but none can avoid. Discomfort is not the enemy. Each morning as we step into the day, we remember that comfort weakens when it becomes a goal. Ease dulls the mind. Resistance, on the other hand, sharpens it. Emotional untouchability is not built in pleasant conditions, but in the deliberate acceptance of difficulty. We often suffer not because pain appears, but because we protest its presence. We ask why things must be hard. We resent effort. We curse inconvenience. Yet the ancient thinkers understood something we are taught to forget. Hardship is the training ground of character. Epictetus compared life to a gymnasium, not a place designed for comfort, but for strengthening what would otherwise remain soft. When we expect ease, we are shocked by resistance. When we expect resistance, we grow from it. Each morning, we remind ourselves that some form of discomfort will arrive. Fatigue, frustration, delay, rejection. This expectation does not darken the day, it steadies it. What is anticipated does not overwhelm us. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the obstacle in the path becomes the path itself. This is not poetic optimism, it is practical wisdom. Every difficulty contains an opportunity to practice patience, courage, restraint, or endurance. By making peace with discomfort, we remove its power to control us. When we no longer demand that life feel good at all times, we stop interpreting pain as failure. Discomfort becomes neutral, sometimes unpleasant, but no longer threatening. Seneca observed that those who have prepared their minds for hardship are rarely surprised by it. What surprises us less frightens us less. What frightens us less rules us less. This principle transforms how we experience emotional pain. Rejection no longer defines our worth. Loss no longer destroys our identity. Criticism no longer feels like annihilation. We allow the sensation to pass through us without attaching a story of defeat to it. Emotional untouchability is not numbness, it is resilience. We feel fully, but we do not collapse. We also practice voluntary discomfort, not as punishment but as preparation, choosing effort over ease, silence over distraction, restraint over indulgence. These small, deliberate hardships teach us that we can endure more than we think. Modern scholars of this philosophy note that voluntary discomfort weakens fear by proving that discomfort itself is survivable. What we can endure no longer terrifies us. When anger arises, we sit with its heat instead of releasing it immediately. When sadness appears, we allow it without rushing to escape it. When fear whispers, we listen without obeying. In this way, discomfort becomes a teacher. It reveals our attachments. It exposes our expectations, and once exposed, they lose their grip. This practice changes our relationship with the body as well as the mind. Fatigue becomes a signal, not a command. Hunger becomes a sensation, not an emergency. Physical discomfort reminds us that we are alive, not endangered. By learning not to panic in discomfort, we strengthen calm under pressure. The mind follows the body's training. Over time, we notice something unexpected. Discomfort loses its sharpness, not because life becomes easier, but because we become steadier. We stop negotiating with reality. We stop asking for exceptions. We meet what comes with a grounded acceptance that says, this too is part of the training. This is the fourth step toward becoming emotionally untouchable. We stop treating hardship as an interruption and start treating it as instruction. Each morning we welcome the day not as it should be, but as it is. And in doing so, we discover that nothing strengthens inner command like the quiet willingness to endure without complaint. Principle number 5, detach from outcomes and commit fully to right action. After learning to accept discomfort as training, we face a subtler challenge, our attachment to results. Each morning, long before outcomes reveal themselves, we begin to measure our worth by what happens next. Success brings relief. Failure brings doubt. Approval brings confidence. Rejection brings collapse. Yet emotional untouchability cannot coexist with this dependence. To master ourselves, we must learn to release outcomes while committing fully to action. The mistake we repeat is believing effort guarantees reward. When reality breaks this expectation, resentment follows. But life was never a transaction. Epictetus warned that we should focus on what we can control, our choices, while accepting that results are shaped by forces beyond us. Action belongs to us. Outcome belongs to fate. Confusing the two binds our peace to chance. Each morning we set our intention not to succeed, but to act well, to speak honestly, to choose restraint over impulse, to do our work with care. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the true measure of a person is not the outcome they achieve, but the quality of the intention they bring to each task. When intention is clean, outcome loses its power to wound us. Detachment from outcome does not mean lack of effort. On the contrary, it demands total commitment. We give our best precisely because we are no longer bargaining for reward. When effort is fueled by fear of failure or hunger for validation, it becomes brittle. When effort is fueled by duty and character, it becomes unshakable. This principle transforms how we experience disappointment. When things do not unfold as planned, we examine our actions instead of cursing the result. Did we act with integrity? Did we apply our skill? Did we remain aligned with our values? If the answer is yes, then nothing essential was lost. Seneca observed that a person who values virtue over outcome is never truly defeated. Detaching from outcomes also dissolves envy. When we stop comparing results, we stop measuring our worth against other people's victories. Their success does not diminish us. Their failure does not elevate us. Each path unfolds according to its own conditions. Our task is not to win the race, but to run our lane with excellence. In moments of success, this principle keeps us grounded. We accept good fortune without arrogance, knowing it is temporary. In moments of failure, it keeps us intact. We refuse to define ourselves by a single result. By releasing the illusion of control over outcomes, we gain something far more stable: self-respect. Modern thinkers who study this philosophy often describe this practice as inner alignment. When action is guided by principle rather than prediction, anxiety fades. We stop rehearsing futures we cannot guarantee. We stop living in constant evaluation. Presence replaces anticipation. Over time, this detachment builds quiet confidence. We no longer chase certainty before acting. We move forward knowing that uncertainty is not a flaw in life. It is its nature. Emotional untouchability emerges when nothing external is required to validate our effort. This is the fifth pillar of inner mastery. Each morning we commit to right action without demanding a specific result. We plant the seed and release it to the soil. Whatever grows, we remain steady. In this way, success no longer inflates us, and failure no longer defines us. We become free, not because outcomes favor us, but because they no longer own us. Principle number 6, reduce desire and you reduce your vulnerability. After learning to release our grip on outcomes, we confront a deeper source of emotional instability: uncontrolled desire. Each morning, before the day tempts us with promises and comparisons, we face a quiet truth. Every desire we allow to grow unchecked becomes a point of vulnerability. The more we need something to happen, to be given, or to be recognized, the more exposed we become. Emotional untouchability begins when desire is disciplined. Desire itself is not the enemy. What weakens us is excess, desire that demands rather than prefers. Seneca warned that poverty is not the absence of possessions, but the abundance of wants. When our happiness depends on external acquisition, status, approval, pleasure, we surrender our stability to forces we do not command. The mind that constantly wants is never at rest. Each morning we examine what we are craving, not to condemn ourselves, but to understand ourselves. Are we chasing validation, comfort, control, certainty? These cravings are rarely about the object itself. They are about the feeling we believe it will grant us. But when desire becomes urgent, it blinds judgment and amplifies fear. We become anxious not because we lack, but because we believe we must have. By reducing desire, we reduce fear. When we no longer insist on praise, criticism loses its sting. When we no longer demand ease, hardship becomes tolerable. When we no longer hunger for constant pleasure, boredom loses its threat. Epictetus taught that freedom begins with wanting nothing that depends on others. This is not withdrawal from life. It is liberation within it. This principle reshapes how we experience temptation. Instead of asking, "Can I have this?" we ask, "Do I need this?" Often the answer reveals how little is truly required for peace. Desire, when questioned, shrinks. What once felt urgent becomes optional, and what is optional cannot control us. We practice voluntary simplicity, not as denial, but as clarity. Choosing enough instead of more. Restraint instead of excess. Quiet instead of noise. These choices are not acts of deprivation, they are acts of power. Modern scholars of this philosophy note that simplicity strengthens emotional resilience by reducing the number of things that can go wrong. Desire also fuels destructive emotions. Envy arises when we want what others have. Anger arises when desire is blocked. Despair arises when desire feels unattainable. By moderating desire, we soften all three. The emotional storms that once overwhelmed us lose their fuel. Over time, reducing desire creates inner abundance. We stop measuring life by what is missing. Gratitude grows, not as forced positivity, but as clear perception. We see what is already sufficient. We notice how much peace costs nothing. This discipline does not make life smaller, it makes it lighter. When fewer things are required for contentment, more moments become acceptable. More days become manageable. More outcomes become survivable. Emotional untouchability is not about having more armor. It is about having fewer exposed nerves. This is the sixth step toward inner mastery. Each morning we loosen our grip on what we think we need. In doing so, we strengthen our hold on ourselves. Desire no longer drags us forward blindly. It follows behind, disciplined and measured. And in that order, the mind becomes calmer, steadier, and far more difficult to disturb. Principle number 7. Govern the inner dialogue. Relentlessly, after reducing desire and removing many of the hooks that pull us outward, we turn inward to confront the most constant influence on our emotional state, the voice inside the mind. Each morning before the world speaks to us, we are already speaking to ourselves. This inner dialogue shapes how we interpret everything that follows. If it is careless, harsh, or fearful, no external discipline can save us. Emotional untouchability requires relentless governance of this inner voice. We often assume our thoughts are facts. They are not. They are interpretations, habits, and echoes of past conditioning. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the soul is dyed by the color of its thoughts. If our inner speech is full of complaint, suspicion, or self-contempt, we poison our own well. No enemy is required. The damage is already underway. Each morning we listen carefully to what the mind is saying, not to agree, but to assess. Is this thought useful? Is it accurate? Does it strengthen character or weaken it? Epictetus urged us to examine our impressions before accepting them. A thought that goes unchallenged becomes belief. A belief repeated becomes identity. This is why vigilance here is non-negotiable. Governing inner dialogue does not mean replacing every negative thought with forced optimism. That only creates resistance. Instead, we practice disciplined neutrality. When the mind says, "This is unbearable," we reply, "It is uncomfortable but survivable." When it says, "I am being wronged," we ask, "Is this about justice or wounded pride?" This measured correction slowly retrains perception. This principle is especially vital in moments of solitude. When no one is watching, the inner voice becomes the sole narrator of our experience. If it is cruel, we carry punishment everywhere we go. Seneca warned that we must live with ourselves at all times. Therefore, we should make that company tolerable, even dignified. By governing inner dialogue, we weaken destructive emotions at their source. Anxiety feeds on catastrophic thinking. Anger feeds on exaggerated insult. Despair feeds on permanent conclusions drawn from temporary states. When these narratives are interrupted, the emotions they fuel lose intensity. Modern scholars often describe this discipline as cognitive sovereignty, the ability to decide which thoughts deserve attention. Attention is limited. Where we place it determines the emotional climate of the day. By refusing to indulge harmful narratives, we reclaim that climate. Over time, the inner voice changes tone. It becomes steadier, less dramatic, less accusatory. We begin to speak to ourselves as a calm mentor would, not indulgent, not cruel, but firm and fair. This voice does not panic in adversity. It does not boast in success. It stays centered. As the inner dialogue stabilizes, the outer world loses much of its power to unsettle us. Insults no longer find agreement inside. Fearful predictions lose credibility. Emotional untouchability emerges quietly, not as bravado, but as composure. This is the seventh pillar of mastery. Each morning we choose the voice that will accompany us through the day. We do not silence the mind, we train it. And when the inner narrator becomes disciplined, reality itself feels less hostile. We are no longer at war within, and so the world finds fewer openings to disturb us. Principle number 8, accept impermanence and release the illusion of permanence. After learning to govern the inner dialogue, we confront a truth that quietly unsettles the unprepared mind. Nothing stays. Each morning before the day begins to move, we remind ourselves that every condition we experience, pleasant or painful, is temporary. Emotional untouchability is impossible, while we cling to the illusion that things must remain as they are. Stability is not found in permanence, but in our relationship to change. We suffer deeply when we mistake what is passing for what is fixed. Pleasure turns into fear of loss. Success becomes anxiety about decline. Love becomes terror of separation. The ancient thinkers warned us repeatedly that attachment to permanence creates vulnerability. Marcus Aurelius reflected that everything we see is already in the process of transformation. When we forget this, we demand guarantees that reality cannot give. Each morning we rehearse impermanence not to become cold, but to become free. We remind ourselves that the body will change, circumstances will shift, people will come and go. Even our strongest emotions will rise and fall. This reflection does not strip life of meaning. It strips fear of its exaggeration. What we know will pass no longer terrifies us in the same way. By accepting impermanence, we soften our grip on both joy and pain. We enjoy what is present without trying to freeze it. We endure what is difficult without believing it will last forever. Epictetus taught that when we kiss a loved one, we should remember that they are mortal, not to diminish affection, but to prevent despair. Awareness of impermanence refines love. It does not destroy it. This principle reshapes grief. Loss still hurts, but it no longer feels unnatural or unjust. We stop asking why change occurred and begin asking how to carry it well. Seneca observed that we often grieve more intensely because we are surprised by loss, not because loss itself is unbearable. What is expected is easier to bear. Impermanence also humbles success. Achievements fade, recognition passes, status shifts. By remembering this, we avoid arrogance and desperation alike. We act with dignity, knowing that fortune lends, but never gives permanently. Emotional untouchability grows when neither rise nor fall defines us. Modern scholars describe this acceptance as temporal awareness, the ability to see moments as moments, not as verdicts on life. When we stop labeling experiences as permanent, emotional intensity softens, panic gives way to patience, despair gives way to endurance. Over time, this practice creates a quiet steadiness. We stop clinging, we stop bracing, we meet each phase of life with a composed acknowledgement. This, too, will change. Not said in resignation, but in strength. This awareness does not detach us from life. It deepens presence. When we stop demanding permanence, we experience what is here more fully. Gratitude grows naturally because we understand that nothing is owed to us beyond this moment. This is the 8th step toward becoming emotionally untouchable. Each morning, we release the illusion that anything must stay the same. In doing so, we loosen fear's grip and strengthen our ability to endure change without breaking. When we accept impermanence, loss loses its terror, and life regains its balance. Principle number 9. Live in accordance with nature, not with expectation. After accepting impermanence, we confront another source of emotional disturbance: the quiet war between reality and expectation. Each morning before the day unfolds, we notice how often we approach life with a script already written: how people should behave, how events should unfold, how we should be treated. Emotional untouchability requires the courage to release these scripts and align ourselves with the way things are, not the way we demand them to be. We suffer not because reality is harsh, but because we resist its character. Nature is indifferent to preference. It does not consult our comfort before changing course. The ancient thinkers urged us to live in harmony with this truth. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that everything happens according to the nature of the whole, even when it disrupts individual desire. When we fight this order, we exhaust ourselves. Each morning we prepare to meet people as they are, not as we wish them to be. Some will be impatient, some careless, some unjust. This preparation is not cynicism, it is realism. Epictetus taught that if we expect figs in winter, we will be disappointed. Expecting virtue from those who have not cultivated it only guarantees resentment. Living according to nature means adjusting ourselves to conditions, rather than demanding conditions adjust to us. We adapt, endure, and act where action is possible. We stop personalizing what is impersonal. Rain does not fall to inconvenience us. People do not fail us to wound us personally. Much of what upsets us loses its charge once we see it as part of a larger order. This principle transforms anger. When we expect perfection, every flaw feels like betrayal. When we accept limitation, we respond with patience or distance, not rage. Seneca observed that anger is born from expecting too much of others and too little of ourselves. By correcting expectation, we disarm anger at its root. Living in accordance with nature also reshapes ambition. We work, strive, and contribute, but without the illusion of total control. We measure success not by domination of circumstance, but by alignment with reason and virtue. Modern scholars describe this as psychological congruence. When inner values match external action, tension dissolves. This alignment creates resilience. When plans fail, we adapt instead of despairing. When effort is met with resistance, we adjust rather than collapse. Emotional untouchability is not rigidity. It is flexibility grounded in principle. Over time, expectation loosens its grip. We stop demanding fairness from chaos. We stop seeking validation from randomness. Life becomes less of a negotiation and more of a participation. The mind grows calmer because it no longer argues with reality. Living this way does not remove hardship, but it removes unnecessary conflict. We stop adding emotional resistance to practical difficulty. What remains is manageable. This is the 9th step toward emotional untouchability. Each morning we align ourselves with the nature of things, not our wishes about them. In doing so, we stop fighting the current and learn to move with it, stronger, steadier, and far less disturbed by what we cannot change. Principle number 10. Practice voluntary self-discipline. Daily, after aligning ourselves with nature rather than expectation, we arrive at a principle that transforms philosophy into lived strength. Voluntary self-discipline. Each morning before circumstances test us, we choose to test ourselves, not through harshness, but through intention. Emotional untouchability is not a gift granted by insight alone. It is built through daily acts of restraint that train the mind to lead rather than follow. When discipline is absent, emotions rule by default. Appetite dictates behavior. Mood determines action. Discomfort triggers avoidance. But when discipline is chosen freely, something changes. We stop being dragged by impulse. Seneca warned that the person who cannot command themselves will always be commanded by something else. Self-discipline is not oppression, it is independence. Each morning we practice small acts of refusal. We delay gratification. We resist unnecessary comfort. We choose effort over ease. These actions appear insignificant, but they reshape identity. The mind learns that it does not collapse when denied. Desire loses urgency. Fear loses leverage. What we can refuse no longer controls us. Voluntary discipline strengthens emotional endurance. When anger rises, we do not immediately release it. When pleasure beckons, we do not automatically indulge. When distraction calls, we return to focus. Epictetus taught that freedom is found not in having everything, but in needing little. Discipline reduces need, and with it, vulnerability. This principle also governs time. We decide how attention is spent rather than surrendering it to noise. Silence becomes a tool. Stillness becomes training. Modern scholars often describe this as attentional mastery, the ability to choose where the mind rests. Without it, emotional regulation is impossible. Discipline reframes discomfort. What once felt intolerable becomes familiar. Hunger, fatigue, boredom, none of these threaten us when we have faced them by choice. Emotional untouchability grows when the mind trusts its own endurance. Importantly, discipline is not severity, it is proportion. We do not punish ourselves, we prepare ourselves. Excessive harshness breaks the spirit, thoughtful restraint strengthens it. The goal is not deprivation, but command. Over time, voluntary discipline produces quiet confidence. We no longer panic at temptation or fear. We have proof, earned daily, that we can resist ourselves. And the one who can resist themselves cannot easily be ruled by others. This practice also restores dignity. When actions align with intention, self-respect follows naturally. We stop negotiating with our principles. Emotional steadiness becomes the byproduct of integrity lived consistently. This is the 10th step toward becoming emotionally untouchable. Each morning we choose discipline before life chooses for us. In doing so, we train the mind to stand firm under pressure. What is trained daily does not fail easily, and when discipline becomes habit, emotional freedom becomes reality. Principle number 11. Remember mortality to clarify what truly matters. After cultivating discipline, we arrive at a reflection that strips away illusion more effectively than any other. The awareness of mortality. Each morning, before we rush into urgency, we pause to remember that time is not promised. This is not a morbid fixation. It is a clarifying lens. Emotional untouchability grows when we stop living as though life is endless and start living as though each day carries weight. We waste enormous emotional energy on trivial offenses, imagined slights, and empty pursuits because we forget how brief our stay is. Marcus Aurelius returned to this thought repeatedly, reminding himself that both the one who remembers and the one who is remembered will soon be gone. When we hold this truth gently in mind, pettiness loses its appeal. Ego quiets. Perspective returns. Each morning we ask ourselves a difficult question. If this were my last day, would this anger deserve my attention? Would this fear justify my paralysis? Would this resentment be worth carrying? Most emotional disturbances fail this test. They shrink when placed beside the reality of impermanence. Remembering mortality refines our values. We become less interested in winning arguments and more interested in living well, less obsessed with image and more committed to character. Seneca warned that people live as though they have an infinite supply of time. wasting the one resource that cannot be replenished. Awareness of death teaches us to spend life deliberately. This principle transforms how we experience hardship. When difficulty arises, we no longer ask only how to escape it, but how to endure it with dignity. Temporary discomfort feels lighter when we remember that all conditions are temporary, including ourselves. Mortality also deepens gratitude. Ordinary moments gain texture, conversations matter more, silence becomes precious. We stop postponing virtue for a future that may never arrive. Emotional untouchability grows when regret loses its breeding ground. Modern scholars often describe this practice as existential grounding, the ability to anchor daily decisions in the awareness of finitude. When we live grounded in this way, anxiety about the future loosens. We focus on what can be done now. Well, importantly, remembering mortality does not diminish joy. It intensifies it. Knowing that nothing lasts makes presence sharper. Attention becomes cleaner. Life is no longer something to endure until later. It is something to inhabit fully. Over time, this reflection produces calm urgency. We act without panic. We choose without delay. We forgive more quickly. Emotional untouchability is strengthened because fewer things feel worth internal conflict. This is the 11th step toward mastery. Each morning we remember that our time is finite, and because of that, our attention becomes sacred. When we stop living as though we have forever, we stop allowing trivial disturbances to steal today. And in that clarity, the inner world becomes quieter, stronger, and more resolved. Principle number 12. Choose virtue as your final authority. After walking through discipline, impermanence, restraint, and mortality, we arrive at the final and unifying principle, the choice of virtue as the highest authority in life. Each morning before emotion, circumstance, or desire attempts to govern us, we make a quiet decision to let character, not comfort, be the standard by which we act. Emotional untouchability is complete when nothing external outranks our commitment to virtue. Virtue is not an abstract ideal. It is lived judgment in motion. It appears as honesty when lying would be easier, restraint when anger feels justified, courage when fear suggests retreat. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the purpose of life is not pleasure or applause, but to act in accordance with reason and justice. When virtue becomes our compass, confusion dissolves. Each morning we ask not what we will gain, but who we will be. This question simplifies everything. When faced with insult, we choose dignity. When faced with temptation, we choose restraint. When faced with uncertainty, we choose courage. External outcomes may vary, but internal alignment remains intact. Seneca wrote that a good person is invincible, not because nothing happens to them, but because nothing corrupts them. Virtue ends inner conflict. Much of our emotional suffering comes from betraying our own standards, saying what we do not believe, doing what we later regret, choosing ease over integrity. When action aligns with principle, the mind rests. Emotional untouchability grows not from insulation, but from coherence. This principle also resolves fear. When virtue is the goal, failure loses its threat. We may lose position, approval, or comfort, but we do not lose ourselves. Epictetus taught that no one can harm us unless we consent to act dishonorably. This consent, once withdrawn, cannot be forced. Modern scholars describe this state as moral autonomy, the ability to act from inner authority rather than external pressure. When we live this way, emotions become servants, not masters. Fear alerts us. Anger signals boundaries. Desire motivates effort, but none of them rule. Over time, choosing virtue creates an inner solidity. We stop oscillating between pride and shame. We stop being pulled apart by contradiction. The mind becomes whole. This wholeness is felt as calm strength. This final principle gathers all the others into one practice. Control what is yours. Release what is not. Respond with reason. Endure discomfort. Detach from outcome. Reduce desire. Govern thought. Accept change. Align with nature. Practice discipline. Remember mortality. All of these converge in the choice to live virtuously, regardless of circumstance. When virtue stands as final authority, emotional untouchability is no longer a technique, it is a way of being. Praise cannot inflate us. Insult cannot diminish us. Loss cannot empty us. We are anchored. This is the culmination of the path. Each morning we rise not to conquer the world, but to govern ourselves. And in that governance we discover the deepest freedom available to a human being. Nothing external can reach the inner citadel unless we open the gates. Dear viewers, if you want to become emotionally untouchable, remember this: true strength is not a feeling, it is a practice. It is built through discipline, self-control, and the daily decision to choose reason over reaction. The world will always test you, but it can only disturb you to the extent that you give it access. Now, reflect for a moment. What part of this lesson hit you the most? Which principle stood out to you? Share it in the comments. I will be in the comment section to read your comments, and I'll respond because your reflections help this community grow. In a few days, I'll release another focused and practical Stoic lesson. So subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next teaching. If you found value here, like the video and share it with someone who is serious about self-mastery. Thank you sincerely for your time, your attention, and your commitment to becoming a stronger, more disciplined version of yourself.